So I took 4 AP exams this year, and we are past the point that the FRQs to every AP exam, or at least everyone that I took, I don't think anyone is still happening, have been released, um, meaning that we are free to discuss them. Some of them have already been like solved online, and answers have been released. So I wanted to make a video about them, just talking about them, just talking about my AP exam experience this year. I brought myself a snack. I ended up taking all of my exams in the same place. The gym at my school, which is actually a building away from the main classroom, so I had to walk on the little sidewalk, and on some of the days it was drizzling, it was raining a little bit, and we all had to rush over. It was cute of us. Um, I always love the hustle and bustle of the pre-exam little 10-minute break and immediate post-exam. Um, it's just nice to be swept up in things and talking to everyone about it. Or not talking about it, that is, because you can't discuss them. But anyways, in the gym, there was this huge pipe overhead that I think it was the pipe at least. But there was something that just kept making this it almost sounded like a plane flying overhead, or like there was a sudden rainstorm, like a whooshing sound. Um, it was always very sudden, lasted like 30 seconds. It was weirdly kind of relaxing. Like I came to look forward to it by the fourth exam. Uh, I'll try to talk about them relatively in order of when I took them. So let's see. I took the AP U.S. government exam first, and now the MCQs you're never allowed to discuss of an AP exam. They never get released, and they never get discussed. So, not going to talk about those whatsoever. Um, not going to talk about the specifics of them. If I will talk about my own experience with them in very vague terms, I had at least an hour of free time, like every exam. I kept finishing really, really early. And I honestly don't know if I feel like in this context that might actually be a bad thing and be, a point off for me. Because at least for some of them, especially like for English, for example, I'm not much of a person to go back and check my work too many times on an MCQ because I go with my first feeling about what is the best and most suitable response. Um, Mind you, I get good scores. English is actually pretty consistently my highest grade. I'm ending off with a 98 in AP Lit this year. But anywho, I took the AP Gov exam first, and I was quite nervous for the FRQs. Because AP Gov has like 13 to 15 or something required Supreme Court cases that you have to memorize, and only one of them will show up on the FRQ on number 3, the SCOTUS comparison, because you have to look at one of the required Supreme Court cases, and you have to compare it to a related Supreme Court case that you didn't study throughout the year, and that you're just given an overview of. So you're given an overview of the comparison case, but you have to know the required case off the top of your head and know all the details that you have to know in order to compare it with whatever the other one ends up being. So I was quite nervous about that because obviously the forefront thought in my head was, oh my God, it's going to be one of the Supreme Court cases that I know less about. Um, I was really banking on it being a First Amendment case, honestly, because I feel like I know those the best and they're the easiest to argue. So it could have been like Tinker v. Des Moines. It could have been Shank v. U.S. It could have been like Angel or however you say it, versus Vitoli or whatever it was, the prayer one. Could have been any of those. I've been happy. But anyways, I get to it when we go to the FRQs, and the required Supreme Court case that I'm comparing to something else is McCulloch v. Maryland, and I think to myself, thank God, I know this one. I really know this one, because I do. I know that one. The Supreme Court cited the Supremacy Clause, um, and what else do I even fucking have to say about it? But the point is, I do know the details of it. The federal government establishes a bank in Maryland, and Maryland passes a state law attempting to tax that bank for itself. An employee decides not to pay said taxes. They get in trouble, but then they countersue. It gets appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says that Maryland cannot tax the federal bank, even if it's in Maryland. And they cite the Supremacy Clause, which says that federal law takes ultimate precedent. So, knocked it out the goddamn park with that one. And then the question that we have to answer, the FRQ question for the argumentative essay. Oh, geez, I actually have to remind myself. Oh, here it is. Yeah, I have the released FRQs here. Aha. Have social movements or congressional action done more to expand opportunities for voting? And my answer was that social movements have done more than congressional actions. And I cited Letter from a Birmingham Jail written by Martin Luther King Jr. So the basic crux of my argument that social movement is ultimately what prompts congressional action, and it is what demands the solutions, so it gets the ball rolling, you know? And it's like, think about the concept of inertia, that an object at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. All right. So congressional actions, while they are ultimately what passes the law, they're rarely ever unprompted. So that was like the basic, was the argument of my essay. So knocked it out the park with that one too. That was easy. And then we have the graph analyses. So you're given regions of America and each of the states of America. You're told their individual income tax rate. Identify the state with the highest individual income tax rate. That's easy. I can read graphs. That's California. Difference in individual income tax rates between the Northeast and Southeast region. Again, easy. I can read graphs. I can see that there are darker colors in general up in the Northeast, and that by and large they have a higher average individual income tax rate per state. Just like, okay, as you guys can tell, I'm doing fucking great. So AP, US Gov, FRQs, thumbs up from me. That exam went really well. I was very happy with it. I got out of there and I was rejoicing with all my friends because we all feel like we did pretty well. Next up, I had AP English Lit. Okay, I have the free response questions pulled up. So first, hang on. So first, I had to do a little bit of poetical analysis. Christopher Gilbert's poem "Marking Time." I have to write a whole essay about how he uses literary elements and techniques to convey his complex reflections while jogging. And I forget what specific literary devices I mentioned, but if we're being honest, every time I mention a specific literary device, I'm phoning it in because I understand how to write an essay and how to include in an essay how I quote unquote, think that the literary devices influenced my experience reading the poem. But like, let's be real here, sometimes a poet ends a line because the fucking line ends there and they've got a syllable count to keep in mind. And sometimes the enjambment is not, in fact, enhancing the intensity um, of the emotions, experience while reading the poem because, it keeps you on your toes as each line ends and each successive line builds on it. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. All right? It's not a universal thing with poetry. Like the literary devices can matter and be intentional and very oftentimes are, but they can also sometimes just be there for the sake of making the poem flow a little better, and that's okay. Like why should that be a problem at all? Um but anywho's, for this poem, Marking Time, I talked about the progressing relationship between images of nature and the revealing or reminding of memories, how it starts out with just the smell of trees. Um, oh, sorry. I talked about a smell reminding him of the image of trees, but then it progresses to the specific imagery of a butterfly reminding him of a memory with his sister. Um, and a bird overhead causes him to reflect on the nature of sibling relationships in general, and the profundity of his with his sister, and in general, um, just the love and relationship between a brother and his sister. So there's like a certain progression there between the intensity of the image of nature and the intensity of his memories and his emotions. It just builds throughout the poem. Now, apparently, a lot of people wrote that the sister in question is dead, and that the voice of the poem is that of a brother whose sister passed away who is reminiscing on their life together. I actually didn't write that because a couple people in my class were saying, like, oh, why would he be reflecting on a 20-year-old memory randomly after just seeing a bird flying overhead? It sounds more like reminiscing than just random reflection because, that just makes more sense. It would just be kind of random. But having two older sisters myself, I personally disagree because this sounded just completely normal to me. Um, in any case, it's open to interpretation, so we're fine. 2 of 3, an excerpt from The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake. The narrator, Rose, discovers that when she eats food, she has the unique ability to perceive the feelings of the person who prepared it. Read the passage and in a well-written essay, analyze how Bender uses literary elements and techniques to convey the narrator's complex experience of eating the chocolate lemon cake her mother has prepared. So in my essay, I emphasized a lot the way the nature of how the poem's written sort of reflects the speaker's emotional and mental state. Um, it's written in first person in like a flashback sequence, sort of. So the person is like writing in first person, but they're writing about the past. So they're saying like, this is what happened to me. This is what I did at the time. But even still, the way they write about their emotional experience reflects their view at the time, because you can still see like certain points where they have a sense of denial, or where they're clueless as to the explanation behind something, but obviously that isn't actually the case if it's a flashback. They know everything in retrospect because hindsight is 2020, but it's still written in such a way as if they don't know it, because they're informing you of what was their emotional state back then. So I did cite specific examples of how language is used to implicitly express denial and ignorance, and how it's slowly built upon and even done away with when by the end of the passage they describe their mother's emotional state without having doubt surrounding it within the passage. So that was how my essay went for that one. And then finally, we had the choose your own work essay, which was what I was really nervous about. Many works of literature depict a conflict between the old and the new. Either from your own reading or the following list, choose a work of fiction in which there is marked tension between the old and the new. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how the tension between the old and new contributes to an interpretation of the work as a whole. Do not merely summarize the plot. Don't do that. So I chose A Raisin in the Sun. And this is so embarrassing for me. I forgot the name of the author in the moment. Let's see here. Lorraine Hansberry. Okay, so I did not actually forget their name. I thought that it was Lorraine Hansberry. I was just so unwilling to actually write that because I was worried I'd be wrong. So I just wrote that it was a 1940s play, not a 1940s play written by Lorraine Hansberry. I know, boo, horrible, embarrassing. But anyways, I wrote about A Raisin in the Sun and its tension between the old and the new, because the tension between the old and the new is practically the crux of the plot of A Raisin in the Sun, because the small, struggling black family in Harlem comes into a large sum of life insurance money. So in each moment, the characters are thinking about their, old lives, obviously their current lives, but bear with me, they're thinking about about the old existing status quo, and they're looking at this large sum of money, and they all see a different vision of how the future can go for them and how they can better themselves and their family. Benitha wants a portion of the money to be set aside to fund her schooling. Walter wants all the money to invest in a startup that he hopes will become a successful business. The mother just wants to buy a house. And obviously, all their differing views are what feed into the conflict that plagues the family throughout the play. And that conflict is caused by that tension between the old and the new. They all feel the exact same desperation. They just express it in slightly different ways and have different visions. So that's the gist of what I wrote about the marked tension between the old and the new in A Raisin in the Sun. Obviously, I went a little deeper than that, but we're streamlining my thought process here. Next up, and I'm going to let y'all know here, this is going to be my absolute favorite one to talk about. We have AP Calculus BC. I took the AP Calc AB exam last year. I got a 3. Fortunately, that is enough to receive credit at the university I'm going to, and I was able to get out of having to take the math placement test, and I should be able to go straight to calculus when I get to college, which is good. But anyways, we have AP Calc BC this year, and I was dreading these FRQs. I looked at all of the scoring guidelines from past years. I did a bunch of practice, but like, for me, like nothing ever feels like enough until I'm in the moment. In any case, first we have the calculator FRQs. Male birds of a certain species arrive at a nesting area over a 30-day period. The rate at which the male birds arrive at the nesting area at time t is modeled by a differentiable function m, where m of t is measured in number of birds per day. Selected values of m of t are shown in the table, and they have a table of values. They have the function t, which measures days, and they have the y value, the birds per day. But anyways, first we have to approximate m prime of 7.5, and I knew how the fuck to do that because I had researched this. I'm looking for the scoring guidelines because admittedly, I would still rather not get this wrong in my explanation of it because I was locked in at the time, but it's been a little bit since then. Okay, well, in any case, let's see. So I had to approximate m prime of 7.5 based on a graph of m of t and t. So I had to take the two values that were from equal distance on either side of 7.5, so 5 and 10, and I had to take the corresponding m of t values. So it's either m of 10 minus m of 5 over 10 minus 5, or the other way around. I did mix those up a little bit, but I've since looked over this because my calculus teacher solved the FRQs in class in order to let us look over them. So I looked at them and I did get it right. So I just rest assured, people, that I did get it right at the time of taking the exam. But anyways, so m of 10 minus m of 5 over 10 minus 5, aka 16 minus 7 over 5, aka 9 over 5. And that's m prime of 7.5. So, bam. And then I had to use a midpoint Riemann sum with the three subintervals 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and 20 to 30. And then using that, I had to approximate the integral of the function that shows the number of birds per day. And I had to interpret the meaning of that integral. Now, if you're given a function and the function measures the number of things that arrive or the number of times an event occurs over a specific time interval, it is always the case that the derivative will be the rate of change of the passing of the event, the rate of change of the graph. So in this context, the meaning of the derivative would be the rate of change in the arrival of number of birds per day. And the integral would give you the total amount of birds that arrived within a given time period. So that's the meaning of the integral from 0 to 30 of m of t dt in the context of this problem. It's the total number of birds that arrived within that time frame. And to do the midpoint Riemann sum, I needed to take the values in each interval, so 10 and 0, then 20 and 10, then 30 and 20, take the difference between those and divide it by the function of the number in the middle of those. There's a chance you also have to multiply it by 2. Like I said, I went back over it and I did get it right in the moment. But in any case, I did all of that, I approximated the integral, and I interpreted it totally correctly. I'm going to move on to the next one now. Now, FRQ number 2, it was either going to be vector or polar. It was either going to be a polar equation that we had to answer a bunch of questions about, or they were going to give us two vector functions, an x of t and a y of t, and we were going to have to do a bunch of stuff with that. I was praying. I was so desperate for it to be a vector. I really, really wanted it to be a vector. It was not. It was not a vector. As such, I don't think I got all of these right, but I actually did amazing relative to how I figured I was going to do. First, there's the area of region S. Now, in here, we're given the function r of theta equals 3 plus 2 sine 2 theta plus cosine 2 theta for 0 is less than or equal to theta is less than or equal to pi, which is just the top of the x-axis where it's where the y is positive. So the area of region S, well, that's the integral from the bottom bound to the top bound of the function squared, I believe. As I've been saying, bear with me, guys, because I did get it right in the moment. But in any case, did that integral, put it in the calculator, wrote it down, moved on. Part B, there is a point on the curve at which the slope of the line tangent to the curve is negative 3/7. Now that's a little word problem we have them, but what does that really mean? That means that dr d theta equals negative 3/7 at t equals theta, and we don't know the value of theta. At this point, dy over d theta equals 3 root 2 over 2. Find dx over d theta at this point. Now I had to go by some definitions here because I knew that dr over d theta equals dy over d theta divided by dx over d theta. And I'm already given dr over d theta at whatever this point is. It's negative 3/7. So I know that negative 3/7 equals 3 root 2 over 2 over dx over d theta. So I had that whole equation. So all I had to do was isolate dx over d theta, meaning that I really just had to switch dr over d theta and dx over d theta, meaning that dx over d theta equal 3 root 2 over 2 divided by negative 3/7. And what do you do when you're dividing two fractions by each other? You flip the bottom one and then you multiply them, because that's how reciprocals work. So that's what I did, and I think you come out with like negative 7 root 2 over 2. In any case, like I said, I checked all my answers against my calculus teacher's work. I got it right. The value of theta in the interval 0 is less than theta is less than pi over 2, at which r has a critical point. That just means that r prime equals 0, and we're given r prime up top. It equals 4 cosine 2 theta minus 2 sine 2 theta. So I just had to set that function equal to 0, and I could just do that in Desmos because this is a calculator FRQ. I had my calculator on me. So I did that, and then you have to use the derivative test to determine whether it's a minimum, maximum, or neither, which means that you have to take two values, one to the left and one to the right of your theta value, and you have to test them. You have to see if they're positive or negative, each one. If they're the same, that means it's neither a minimum nor a maximum. And I kind of always mix up which is minimum, which is maximum. Don't worry though, I promise I really did get it right in the moment. And then there was a part D about distance, but I'm going to not talk about that actually. And then I was praying so desperately that FRQ number 3 would not be a slope field FRQ. I was really hoping it would not be slope field based. It was. And the slope field for the differential equation dH over dt equals negative 1/15 h minus 20. I'm going to do a little camera cut here because sometimes Clipchamp gets weird if I record too long of a segment. Anyways, dH over dt equals negative 1/15 h minus 20. Now, some of these I honestly fucked up. But they give you a false slope field and they ask you why that slope field could not be for this differential equation. And I simply wrote that it does not have an asymptote at h equals 20, which, considering it's a function negative 1/15 multiplied by h minus 20, it would have to have an asymptote at 20. And it would be somewhat of a logarithmic graph. And the slope field that they show us is rather a positive exponential graph. So, don't know. Part B and C I'm not going to talk about. Part D, use separation of variables to find an expression for h of t, the particular solution to the given differential equation, with initial condition h of 0 equals 75. Now dH over dt equals negative 1/15 h minus 20. And we're looking for h of t. So we have to separate the dH and the dt. And we already have negative 1/15 multiplied by h minus 20. There's actually no need to distribute that. You can separate the function in parentheses with or from its coefficient. And you get dH over h minus 20 equals negative 1/15 dt. And then from that point, you just have to integrate both sides. And you get the natural log of the absolute value of h minus 20 equals negative 1/15 t. And because you have a natural log in there, what you then have to do is raise both sides to the power of e. Because raising a natural log function to the power of e just means that you're stuck with said function just on its own. So you get h minus 20 equals e to the power of negative 1/15 t plus c, because it's an integral. And then you just have to plug in the initial condition. You guys get it. Next, it's graph interpretation. They give us a graph of f prime. So first, we're given that a function g is defined by g of x equals f of x minus ln x, and we have to find g prime of 2. Now we're given a graph of f prime, luckily, and we're currently deriving f of x minus ln x. Okay, I remembered it correctly. The derivative of the natural log of x is simply 1 over x. And the derivative of, for example, g of x minus h of x is simply g prime x minus h prime x. So if g of x equals f of x minus ln x, then g prime of x just equals f prime x minus 1 over x. So g prime of 2 would just be f prime of 2 minus 1/2. And given that we're given a graph of f prime, and we actually know the function of 2 because it labels that, we know that g prime of 2 is 1.5 minus 1 over 2. Easy, right? So next, we have to find all values of x at which the point, within the interval 0 is greater than x is greater than 3, at which the graph of f has a point of inflection. Let's see here. So the point of inflection means that the second derivative equals 0. And if the second derivative equals 0, that means the first derivative would have to have an instantaneous slope of 0 at the line drawn parallel to the point. That happens at 1 and that happens at 3. So there you go. So next we have to find where on the interval -4 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 4, that f is both increasing and concave down. Now, increasing means that f prime is positive. However, concave down means that f double prime is negative. Now, since f double prime is simply every point of that function is the value of the slope drawn parallel to a point on the graph of the first derivative, what we can infer from that is f double prime being negative simply means that f prime has a negative slope. So to find where the graph of f is both increasing and concave down, we need to find where the graph of f prime is positive in that it's above the x-axis, but we also need to find where it has a negative slope. And that happens on the interval approximately 1, 2, 3. There might have been another interval too, but that's the only one I'm seeing at this exact moment. Like I said, guys, way back when I took the exam, like 2 weeks ago by now, I had the answers fresh in my head and could compare them to my calculus teachers. Next, we have one that I struggled a great deal with, but actually got some shit right on, and I was really proud of myself. We have a function, cubed root of x minus 1, and then a g function e to the power of negative 2x minus 4. We have their points of intersection, and we have a couple of points along the x-axis where an intercept is denoted. First, we had to evaluate the integral from 1 to 2 of f of x dx, meaning that I had to integrate x minus 1 to the power of 1/3, meaning that I had to add 1 to 1/3, which is 4/3, and then put the whole thing over 4/3, which is the same as being multiplied by 3/4. So you have 3/4 parentheses x minus 1 to the power of 4/3, or something along those lines. And then you plug in 2 to that equation, and then you plug in 1 to that equation, and you take away f of 1 from f of 2, because they're the top and bottom bounds of the integral. And then we had to write but do not evaluate an expression involving one or more integrals that gives the volume of the solid generated when region R is rotated about the x-axis. Here's the trick with questions like that. What is a full rotation around an axis? It's a circle, right? And what's that one number that's always fucking coming up whenever we talk about circles? That's right, it's pi. So what number am I definitely going to have when I'm talking about volume generated by rotating something around something else? I'm going to have to include pi. I know that. I believe in this context it was 2 pi, but in any case, you have to find the bounds also of the volume that you're talking about, because region R is denoted by the x-axis, a line from 2, 0 to 2, 1, and the f of x function that I mentioned earlier. So that's our bounds. It's from 2 to 1, or 1 to 2, if you will. And then, because we have a top function and a bottom function, it would have to be the top function minus the bottom function. But the bottom function here would be a line at which x equals 0. So we're not actually taking away anything from f of x. So it's like 2 pi times the integral from 1 to 2 of the cubed root of x minus 1. Maybe it was squared? I forget. In any case, next, and I actually had to be really fucking clever with this one because I did not know, write but do not evaluate an expression involving one or more integrals that gives the perimeter of region R. Like, what the fuck, right? But then I thought to myself, okay, the perimeter of region R, that'll have to be the length of the function of f of x, which is one of the bounds of region R. How do you get distance with an integral? Oh wait, I know that. I know that from vectors because I actually kind of know vectors. The distance formula is the integral from whatever spot to the next that you're going to of the derivative of the function squared evaluated at those 2 points. So maybe that same principle applies. Maybe I just have to put the integral of the square root of f prime of x squared. However, there are 2 other lines that also make up this region. There's a line from 1 to 2 on the x-axis, but then there's a line from 2 to 1 upwards. And then I thought to myself, wait, those are just 2 line segments of length 1. I know that. So I can just put 2 plus that integral that I just talked about. Now, as it turns out, for some reason that I don't understand, it was supposed to be f prime of x squared plus 1 within the square root. That's within the integral. So I got partial credit on part C. And then I had to evaluate the integral from 2 to infinity of g of x dx, so don't even fucking worry about that. Lastly, we have FRQ number 6, which pissed me the fuck off. Because it's a Maclaurin series, and I didn't look over Maclaurin series. So I was going by my vague memory of doing Maclaurin series way back in like December practically. So I did horrible on this. For example, the function f is defined by f of x equals g prime of x. Write the first 4 non-zero terms of the Maclaurin series for f. Now, g of x is the original Maclaurin series, so they're asking us for the derivative of the Maclaurin series. Turns out, all you fucking have to do is find the derivative of each term within the Maclaurin series individually. So it would have just been 0 minus 2/5 plus, what is that, 4/25 x minus 6 over 125x squared, blah, 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 blah. It would have been that fucking easy, but I didn't know that. Then we had Lagrange error bounds, which of course I forgot. But anyways, so that was my experience with the FRQs. I think I did pretty gosh darn good on them. I'm really happy with how they went for me overall. I was expecting way worse than what I got. And I had fun taking the AP Calc BC exam. Lastly, I took the AP Spanish Literature exam. The AP Spanish Literature exam was daunting, I will admit. We took some practice exams in class, and I was projected to get no more than a 3 based on my performance. I didn't do so good on the essays. And here's the other thing. It was only me and one other person taking this exam. Also happens to be a girl that I've known for 12 years. And she's way fucking smarter than me. Like, way smarter. So I know for a fact already that she did better than me. And, you know, I've had over a decade to come to terms with that and make peace with it. So I'm not really too beat up by it. But here's the thing. The class of AP Spanish Literature never once happened at my high school before this year. I was among the first to ever take that class at my school, which means that no matter what score I get on the AP exam, me and these other people, we are officially the highest ranking Spanish students in the history of our school. We're the people that made it the farthest. And given that it was only me and this one other person who took the exam, her and I are really officially the best two Spanish students to come out of this school, like ever. But I know for a fact that she did better than me, which means that I have to live with the fact that, and my teacher is actually retiring this year. She's had a great career. We're all really proud of her, and we all hope she has an amazing retirement, for the record. But yeah, she's retiring this year, and she fully believes that in all likelihood, the class of AP Spanish literature will not be taught at my high school again after this, because not too many people are even qualified to teach it or really want to or make it that far. Um, so so now I have to live with the fact that I am the second best Spanish student in my high school's history from now, likely and likely to come for decades, um, if the record's even ever broken. So there I am, um, and she is officially the best Spanish student to come out of our high school's history. So it's like, on the one hand, I should definitely be extremely proud of myself, but on the other, it stings slightly. But on the third hand, which you might not have known I had, um, I am actually very happy for her, like genuinely. There's really no malice here. In any case, it was just me and her taking the exam. For some reason, they still stuck us in a full gym, but whatever. So we sat next to each other. MCQs were a breeze. We both agreed. My speaking comprehension was actually all the way there for the audio portions. That's what I was worried about, but I could understand them just fine. Again, no discussing the specifics of the MCQs. So let's get to the FRQs. Now, for the FRQs, the way it's broken down in AP Spanish Lit each year, first you have an excerpt from one of the required readings of the year, and you have to know the author and time period off the top of your head and the historical context, and you have to analyze a certain element of the story, um, using that context. Next, we have a text and art comparison. It gives you some kind of story or poem, generally from the required reading list, and then it gives you an art piece. You got to compare the two. Then you have to write two actually full length essays, not short 15-minute responses. First, it'll give you another excerpt, which I think tends to be from the required readings. And then it gives you a two art piece comparison, one required reading, one non required reading. You have to compare the two. So I was dreading this. I was truly terrified of it. I was so very scared of doing the FRQs. Oh, and let me say this. The CD player wasn't working at first for the audio portions. Our proctor had to go get another one. So we got off to a 1 minute late start. And here's the thing, it's an entirely paper exam. Um, on the student's end, there is no technology involved. Um, and both my fellow exam taker and I, we got to a 1 minute late start because of the CD player trouble, but we both finished 20 minutes early. Now, obviously, our proctor, based on the rules of AP exams, couldn't start the next session early or anything like that. I wouldn't have expected that. Um, but it's like, we both have our pencils down, notebooks closed, we're completely finished. There's only two of us, so I know you can tell. And you're not even gonna let me get up and go get a drink of water, like, even if you're right there and you see me the whole time. I just gotta sit down. And it's like, obviously, you can't start the next section early. That's reasonable. But again, we got off to a late start. Our proctor chose to set an hour timer from the moment we started and still ended us late, even though we both finished with 20 minutes to spare based on a regular starting time. So we could have just ended at the national standard time. Why didn't we do that? But anyways, we start the FRQs. Also late, because we're just on the late schedule now. Um, but but we start the FRQs. Um, and I was thinking to myself the whole time, all I was thinking to myself was, oh my God, I'm not going to know the author. I'm not going to know the time period. It's going to be a story that I just totally don't recognize and one that I didn't pay attention to. I opened the booklet. It was Choc Mule. I'm so happy. Choc Mule. It was written by Carlos Fuentes in El Siglo XX. It was written in the modernist time period. It's an example of one of the fantasy stories that includes a supernatural element to it that is used as an allegory of past historical relations. It's a story about interpersonal relations. It's a story about relations in regards to power. It's a story about subversion of power, um, and it expresses all of these literary concepts and temas. It expresses that por la fantasía es lo que escribí. Porque hay una estatua que es, bueno, que se viene a la vida después de ponerse en contacto con agua. You guys get it. So we're given Choc Mule, and we have to write about uh, how it deals with the theme of transformation, which is so fucking easy. It's about a statue that slowly comes more and more to life throughout the story after coming into contact with water, and slowly causes more and more paranormal things to happen within the house of the guy that bought it. Easy. Easy as fuck. I wrote some good shit about how it dealt with the theme of transformation. It even deals with transformation in the context of relations of power because the relations of power are slowly subverted throughout the story. Blah, blah, blah. Anyways. I have it pulled up here. Okay. Es tanto que Rosa y Azucena. That's the poem that we had to read, part 2. En tanto que de Rosa y Azucena se muestra la calor en vuestro gesto y que vuestro mirar ardiente, honesto, enciende el corazón y lo refrena. I've been trying to work on rolling my R's. I hope you guys can tell. So anyways, there's that poem, which is about a woman's beauty and comparing a woman's beauty to nature through a bunch of metaphors and talking about savoring youth because it'll eventually pass. So it's talking about the passage of time, la belleza, la juventud, bueno, la admiración de la belleza de una mujer específicamente, amor. That wasn't so good. Amor. Like I said, I'm still working on it. So we have that poem, but then we have a painting of a guy kneeling with this elaborate bouquet of flowers and a woman seemingly looking at the audience, and they're both in an ornate garden with a statue in the background. It's all big and elaborate. It's practically the same as the poem. Like, I don't know if I touched on very many differences even. I just wrote about how they both, well, they both represent the Siglo de Oro because those are the typical themes of the poems that were written in that time period. All of that I just went over. That's how they both represent the Siglo de Oro. But yeah, very very similar, the poem and the art piece. I guess we're comparing it. Anyways, La Casa de Bernarda Alba. We had to write a whole essay on La Casa de Bernarda Alba. Analiza cómo representa las características de la tragedia y el contexto sociocultural de la España rural de principios del siglo XX. En tu ensayo debes contar los recursos literarios de la tragedia. Blah, blah, blah. Now, here's the thing. Here's my horrible issue. I wrote that this work was from la generación del 98. En realidad, es de la generación del 27. And in reality, it's from the generation of 27. And that's 1898 and 1927. So they're not so far apart because the generación del 98 started in 1898. It stretched into the early 1900s, and la generación del 27. So they're really close. I was like 20 years off with my time periods. And I wrote about how this play represents the characteristics of La Generación del 98. just because of how angsty it is and how searching for identity it is and how it shows the conflict between one central authority figure and like 8 different subjects, which is a mom and her daughters. But trust me, it's bad. I I wrote about how it represents the loss of collective Spanish identity, and the mother is meant to represent Spain, and her reaction and her relation with her daughters represents the final death throes of the Spanish Empire as its final colonies gained independence, which is what sparked La Generación del 98. La crisis internal y la búsqueda de una identidad um, de España. And I also wrote about how it represented the Civil War because you have these 8 daughters. They're all encroached in this one space together. They can't escape, they can't leave, but they can't solve the conflict either, right? So, what do we think when we think a bunch of different groups all sharing the same place, trapped in a conflict with one another? It's like a civil war. So that was, crux of my essay. And then we had the poem comparison. It was motherfucking Volverán los oscuras golondrinas. I don't like that poem. It's really hard for me to understand. It's an old poem. It's super metaphorical. It's written in Old Spanish, and I have to do a bunch of interpretation works. But in any case, I had to compare that poem with another poem about love. And I had a bunch of stuff to write. Volverán las oscuras golondrinas, that's written in the future tense. The poem against which we're comparing it, Recuerda el trinar del ave, that's written largely in well, technically it's written in the present tense, but it's written as somebody encouraging something else to remember and reflect upon things, so it's written about the past. So one's about the future, one's about the past. One's about being optimistic and looking forward to things. One's about looking back on what already has been. I'm tired now, so I'm not going to go over everything else, but I listed literary devices. I made comparisons between the overall message of the poem and how they both express that message. I was very happy with my poem comparison. I wrote like a good 2 pages without skipping any lines or anything in the exam page. So overall, wasn't as bad as I thought. I am officially the second best Spanish student in the entire existing history of my high school, and also likely the continuation of its legacy. That's me. That's one of my accolades in life. Anyways, overall, my AP exams all went really well. There really wasn't too much of a hitch at any point. I was very happy with them. I was very happy to get to share with my friends from class in this experience. Even if I only did get the minimum passing score, even if I managed to get 3s on everything somehow, I'm actually still going into college with 36 credits, and I'm pretty gosh darn happy about that. Now that I've come to the end of all this, I do have to admit that I have actually a lot of times kind of had some self-consciousness surrounding worrying that I just sound like a huge nerd all the time, and that I am perhaps perceived that way, as just being a big old nerd. And it's definitely not helping my case when I make a 30 plus minute video talking about taking 4 different exams and how much I actually enjoyed that. Not really helping my case at all. So if I can just request of everyone that you try to just dissociate the fact that I'm the one saying these things with everything being said, and you just take everything I say at face value and try to totally forget that it was me. And you just think of me as like a cool guy instead and not a big huge nerd. I would appreciate that out of you guys. That's my request to the audience. But anyways, AP exams were fun this year. I liked them. I think they all went well for me. I like taking them, and I'm going to have so many college credits, and yay for me. Goodbye.